Good day, everyone. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 5, the message. This lesson focuses on how messages are formed and how they gain meaning. Pati na rin yung mga components like verbal, nonverbal, signs, symbols, and words. We'll look into how messages are created and how meanings are associated with them through interpretation and use. Under this topic, we explore subtopics like semiotics, structural linguistics, and nonverbal communication. Kasama rin yung mga interpretations related to language, gender, and constructivism. Lastly, we'll touch on how messages are produced and used with strategies such as speech act theory, coordinated management of meaning, and how communication relates to cultural diversity and reducing inequalities. Let's start with semiotics. Semiotics helps us understand the meaning behind signs and symbols. Kasama na yan sa everyday life natin. This field focuses on how something gets meaning, not what it means. For example, kapag may smoke, we think na, may sunog. This, this is how we learn to associate smoke with fire, and that's semiotics. Theories in this tradition explain how an object, idea, or situation can come to represent something else. They help us understand paano nagkakaroon ng meaning yung isang bagay. Let's now talk about the two basic concepts of semiotics, which is the signs and symbols. A sign is something that gives a clear and direct meaning. It triggers a reaction either mentally or physically. We understand it quickly kasi may obvious connection siya to something real. For example, may red traffic light clearly means stop. On the other hand, a symbol is much more complex. It can have different meanings depending on culture, experience, or personal interpretation. In simple terms, signs have fixed and concrete meanings, while symbols are open to interpretation. Susan Langer said, symbols are instrumental of thought. They allow us to think about something even if it's not physically present. Semiotic also deals with linguistic and nonverbal elements. When these two interact, they create a system of meaning. Linguistic refers to words and grammar, while nonverbal focuses more on signs and symbols. Together, they form a complex communication systems. At the core of this is the triangular meaning by Charles Saunders Peirce. Triangle of meaning. The triangle of meaning explains the relationship between the object, the interpreter, and the sign or symbol. Let's take this as our example. When someone says the word dog, that word is the sign. The actual dog is the object, and your mental image of a dog is your interpretation. But here's the twist, not everyone sees dog the same way. Someone who loves dog may see it as something cute, but someone who has bitten by a dog before might see it as scary. So the meaning of a sign depends on the person interpreting it. Let's apply this concept to a real-life example. Rachel Anderson Brugsma conducted a study on the hijab or the veil worn by Muslim women. In this case, the veil is the object that becomes a sign of Muslim identity, but its meaning varies depending on who interprets it. To many Muslims, or to many non-Muslims, the hijab is seen as oppressive, but for the Muslim women, the study, it meant something completely different. For them, it represented identity, modesty, resistance to objectification, and empowerment. So again, the meaning is not the object itself, or even the word itself, but in the thought of the interpreter. Semiotics is divided into three areas: semantics, syntactics, and pragmatics. These three build on one another. Semantics explains the direct link between the sign and its meaning. It answers the question, what does this sign stand for? Syntactic looks at how signs relate to each other. Signs don't usually stand alone on their own. They form patterns and systems, like how words form a sentence. Then comes pragmatics. This is where context comes in. Pragmatic asks the question, how does the situation, culture, or speaker affect the meaning of the sign? So to fully understand a message, we need to understand all three: the meaning of the sign, how it relates to others, and how context affects interpretation. Now let's move on to visual signs. How we interpret visuals depends on a lot of factors like experience, culture, and shared norms. Unlike words, images require patterns recognition. They're more open to interpretation. So to understand visuals, we rely on both personal knowledge and shared understanding. This makes communication much more subjective and flexible. Semiotics gives us two important theories that explain how messages work: structural linguistic and nonverbal communication. Structural linguistic focuses on words and how they form meaning. Nonverbal communication deals with signs and symbols that go beyond words. Both work hand in hand in creating meaningful messages. Together, they lay the foundation of how we understand communication. Ferdinand de Saussure is considered the founder of structural linguistics. His theory focuses on words and as structures of meaning. He introduced the idea of arbitrariness. There's no natural connection between a word and what it means. The word tree doesn't look like a tree. We just agree that it means that. Meaning also comes from differences. Words have meaning when we contrast them with one another or with others. For example, bat versus bat. The change in one letter creates a whole new word. Even grammar shows this. Has run and will run have different meanings because of tense. Meaning is shaped by how signs differ from each other within a system. Saussure also made a distinction between langue and parole. Langue is the formal language system, stable and structured. Parole is the actual use of language, which is flexible and constantly changing depending on the situation. For example, we learn grammar rules, langue, but we don't always speak formally in real life, parole. This is why structural theories created models to break down languages into parts, sounds, word parts, phrases, and sentences. It helps us understand how language evolves and adapts in use. Eventually, scholars moved beyond structure and studied how language develops in brain. Noam Chomsky proposed generative grammar, the idea that we have a universal grammar wired into us. This allowed us to create an unlimited number of sentences, even without memorizing all of them. Then came discourse studies, which focus on longer real-life language use like conversations, speeches, and media. Critical discourse analysis goes deeper, looking at how language reflects power, identity, gender, and race. It helps us understand how language shapes society and how meanings are influenced by power and social dynamics. With this, we finish discussing semiotics and structural linguistics. Now, let's move on to nonverbal communication, which is the counterpart of structural linguistics.
Good afternoon. My name is Roshan Reyes, and today we're going to be tackling about my part in our report, which is all about nonverbal communication, its concept, and as to what's its uses to us. Okay, so what is nonverbal communication? Nonverbal communication refers to clusters of behaviors used to convey meaning without using words. Like these behaviors often work together with verbal language to create a fuller message. Scholars have studied everything from facial expressions and gestures to space, time, and even clothing under nonverbal communication. So basically, my part is all about the uses of having to communicate without actually saying anything or being or having conversation with someone without the use of verbal communication. So here are the key theories and concepts provided by Paul Eltman and Wallace Friesen. They are known for breaking down nonverbal behaviors into categories and functions, and they also outline five relationships between verbal and nonverbal communications, which are going to be the first one is repetition, the second one is substitution, third one is complementation, fourth is contradiction, and the last one for the fifth is emphasis. So we're gonna go through them one by one. So repetition, same methods in both verbal and non-verbal. So this means having to show without saying that you agree with someone. Let's say, for example, you nod while also agreeing, and therefore it gives the same meaning both verbal and non-verbal. And the next one is substitutions, which is non-verbal replaces verbal. Example for this is when we are asked a question, like pag may nagtanong sa atin, when we don't know what to answer to that, we often do this, the shrugging posture, which is signifying that we do not know what we are being asked without even saying anything. The third one is complementation, which is nonverbal and it adds meaning. An example of this would be the way a person talks towards one another. For example, nag-uusap kayo and your friend suddenly changes their tone to a more sarcastic tone of voice, meaning he or she might be being playful towards you. And the next one is contradiction, which means non-verbal and conflicts with the verbal. An example with this would be saying that okay ka lang or I'm fine, but the face you are showing tells us otherwise. Like you say you're fine, but in reality your face shows that you are really upset. And the last one is emphasis. Emphasis means nonverbal highlights and verbal. Example of this would be slamming a table while saying something important. So this would mean emphasis would mean that you are trying or at least showing that and encouraging other people to listen to what you have to say, thus being the example of slamming the table while announcing something. Okay, so we're gonna go over the next slide, which is key theories and concept. They are categorized by nonverbal behaviors by the first one is origin, meaning and it has three parts or subparts. First one is innate. Innate means you are born with it. The second one is species constant, and it means universal across humans. So an example of this would be the gesture which we Filipinos use when we want to point something without actually pointing is, whereas we use the nose or the lips to point something. The next one is the variance, which varies from culture or person. And the second concept would be coding, and again with three subparts. The first one is arbitrary, which means no direct connection to meaning. For example, well, doing this it might mean two, but to other people it might mean like you come in peace, or that's being called a peace sign. And the second one is iconic, which means or you would do something or you would show something that it literally means that. For example, you mimic a shape. Like when I do this, you're referring to a circle. And the third one is intrinsic, which means part of the meaning itself. For example, if you show you're crying or if you show that you do this, it means what it literally shows. You are crying. And the last one for the key theories and concepts would be number 3 is usage, with again 3 subparts. The first one is communicative, which is done on purpose in order for us to communicate. And the next one is interactive, which we do to get a response out of somebody. And the last one is informative, which is to give off more information even if intentional, like telling someone a random fact about something. And another set of key theories and concepts, we have here 5. The first one is emblems. When you say emblem, it is a clear gesture with specific meanings. Like for example, when we do this, it normally means you agree or it's a thumbs up. And the next one is illustrators, support spoken words and pointing while giving directions. An example would be, let's say you were asked by someone where would the restroom would be. You would do the pointing gesture. Let's say, oh, it's that way, like that. And the third one is adapters. It means to release tension. An example with this would be if you're in an unfamiliar environment and you don't want to seem like you're really stressed, you do like you fidget with your, let's say, you fidget with your phone, you fidget with your fingers, just to show, to release tension that you might be experiencing. And the fourth one is regulators, which means control conversation. For example, when an example would be like maintaining eye-to-eye contact with the person you are talking to and keeping up with the level of tone they might be using. And the last one is affect displays. It means that to show emotion. Let's say when you're talking to someone and you smile, you're showing that you are really happy to have that conversation with them. The next slide would be where we'd be tackling about the expanded types of nonverbal communication, which is expanded by Judy Bergon. We have seven. The first one is kinesics. This means body movement, like I previously mentioned. When you want to point out something, you do, or you agree with something, you do this. The second one is vocalics, aka the tone of speech, which we use to when we have a conversation with someone. And the third one is physical appearance. Believe it or not, the way we dress actually affects the conversations we have with one person or other person, for example. And the fourth one is haptics, which is mainly focused on touch, like when you're talking to somebody and you really want to emphasize what you were talking to, you sometimes grab their shoulder like that. And the fifth one is prosemics, which is space. And the sixth one is chromatics, which is time. And the last one is artifacts, object, which means using objects in your conversation as well as clothes. Miss Judy also pointed out difference between verbal and nonverbal communications. So that would be non, the first one is nonverbal, is more analogic or continuous than digital, discrete like words. And she also stated that it is often iconic, which means visually resembles its meaning. Like I said before, when you're referring to us this, it means you're referring to a circle. And the next one is multimodal, which might send many signals at once. Let's say when you do this, it's either you're referring to the number 2 or a peace sign, which has multiple meanings at once. And next one is often spontaneous, not always intentional, like in a sarcastic way. And the last one is in the moment, which can't refer to the past or future like words can. So that would be all in the 7 areas of types of nonverbal communication presented by Judy Bergen, and we're gonna go over to the next, which is the set of expanded areas by Miles Patterson. He proposed that seeing nonverbal communication as a system. Nonverbal behavior is influenced by personality, gender, culture, biology, and settings, which is partially tackled by me a while ago when I said that the tone of voice, when the way men to men talk with each other as well as women and women, and also their culture, etc. The next one is emphasize that people don't react to a single behaviors but to patterns, like mimicking another person's speaking pattern to seem like, or to make it seem that they are really invested in talking with you. And the fourth one is Miles suggested also that more research on how senders and receivers affect each other at the same time. And he also saw that nonverbal behaviors as a tool for identity, expressing our emotions, forming relationships, and making impressions, and possibly even deceptions. And its modern application would that is also stated that an example with this when I read in the book was Minowa, McLaren, and Stevens analyze how violent women are visually represented in most cases. Like, let's say in a toxic relationship, a woman would be the commonly misconcepted image, which is like abusive and etc. When in reality, they found that even empowering looking images often sexualize women, showing how nonverbal cues like gaze and representation can be misleading. This would mean that how other people look at women differently. Some might look at women as a sort of not really acceptable in modern times. A final note in this topic is nonverbal communication is key to understanding how we people interpret messages beyond words, thus being nonverbal. This includes being in line with cultural references, emotional, and even unconscious signals that shape our everyday interactions. So I hope you learned something from my part today in our report. Again, I'm Roshan Reyes, and thank you very much for listening.
A pleasant day everyone. I'm Annicole A. Kiped and as a continuation, we will be discussing the several approaches of interpretation that have grounded the work of the jurist in communication. But before that, ano nga ba ang interpretation? Interpretation is the process of understanding the meaning and intent behind the message considering both verbal and nonverbal cues. It is determined by the meanings attributed by a target to a specific message within a common context, including how the recipient of the message interpret the source's relational intent. So basically, interpretation is how you perceive the message depends on the intention of the senders or the sources. Dito naman sa phenomenology of perception, it is associated with Maurice Merleau-Ponty and again siya sa idea ni Husserl na more on narrow and objectivist view. So kung kay Husserl is more on objective, dito naman kay Merleau-Ponty is more on subjective one. So the human being is a unified physical and mental being who creates meaning in the world. We know things only through our own personal relationship with them. We are affected by the world and we are also affected the world by how we experience it. So dito, si Mary Ponte, he believes that the physical and the mental of a human being is inseparable. So kumbaga hindi sila nagkakahiwalay. Na kung ano ang nararanasan ng body natin, kung ano yung na-experience ng body natin is nagre-reflect siya sa utak natin. And ganun din sa kung ano ang nararanasan na utak natin, nagre-reflect din siya sa physical appearance natin. So, dito sa phenomenology of perception, we provide meanings on things that depend on their value in one's life. Kung ano yung binibigyan natin ng kahulugan ng isang bagay, depende sa importansya or halaga na binibigay nito sa buhay natin. This principle relates to the idea of what something in life means to us and the level of potential within it. So dito, sinasabi na nakikita natin yung halaga ng isang bagay kung tayo ay nakikinabang dito. So kumbaga, binibigyan natin ng kahulugan ng isang bagay depende sa epekto nito sa buhay natin or kung ano yung binibigay nito sa isang buhay ng tao. Hermeneutic phenomenology, also known as philosophical hermeneutic, associated with Martin Heidegger, consistent on the second branch but extended it further by applying it more completely to communication. So, in hermeneutic, there's an application of communication. So, meaning to say, gagamit tayo dito ng language. The reality of something is not known by careful analysis or reduction, but by natural experiences, which is created by the use of language in everyday life. So, si hermeneutic phenomenology is relevant to communication because of the link between the language and social interaction. Communication is the vehicle by which meaning is assigned to experience. When you communicate, you work out new ways of seeing the world. Your speech affects your thoughts, and your thoughts create new meanings. So when we say hermeneutic, it means interpretation of language. We interpret the written words depends on how we perceive or kung paano natin naiintindihan yung written words. So even today, any written text is open for interpretation, and whether the author is alive to explain what he meant is not considered relevant because it will only based on your personal interpretation of the text. Though it is not limited sa written words, even action can be viewed as text. But ang magiging problem lang doon is how do we interpret a message that is no longer part of a actual event. So katulad nga sinabi ko kanina, very crucial ang interpretation especially when it comes to written text or messages kasi hindi natin may ma-identify kung genuine ba or hindi, and it can also lead to misinterpretation. For example, nag-joke ka sa friend mo and nag-reply siya ng tawa pero hindi naman naka-caps lock. And medyo na-offend ka kasi hindi mo kasi na-interpret mo siya as a fake and medyo sarcastic yung tawa niya. So, we should really be careful when we interpret things because it can cause misunderstanding. So, dito naman, we have the variation of phenomenology, the three general school of thought, classical phenomenology by Edmund Husserl, the phenomenology of perception by Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and the hermeneutic phenomenology by Martin Heidegger. In classical phenomenology, it is primarily associated with Edmund Husserl, the founder of modern phenomenology, and also he believes that the truth could obtain through direct consciousness, but we must be disciplined in how we experience things. Only through conscious attention can truth be known. So dito, bibigyan ko kayo ng scenario. We have B1 and B2. So si B1, ini-insult, minamak, and bini-verbally abuse niya si B2. So dahil doon, na-trigger si B2 kaya niya sinuntok si B1. And you as a witness, hindi mo nakita yung buong pangyayari. Ang nakita mo lang is yung nagalit si B2 and sinuntok si B1. So in that kind of situation, you already created an interpretation on how things happen dahil lang sa nakita mo. Tapos, habang nasa police station kayo, you claim that B1 is the real victim and si B2 ang nag-umpisa ng lahat. So, in order to arrive at truth, through conscious attention, we must put aside our biases. We must suspend our categories of thinking on habits of seeing in order to experience the things in reality. In this way, the objects of the world present themselves to our consciousness. So in continuation, so based on your claim, you already have bias about the scenario. So ang bias nun is kiniklaim mo nga na si B1 talaga ang biktima at si B2 talaga ang nag-umpisa. Pero nung pinakinggan nila yung side ni B2, sinabi ni B2 na hindi talaga siya ang nag-umpisa ng lahat. Kumbaga, na-trigger lang siya kaya niya sinuntok si B1. So, if you put down your biases, you will fully understand the situation. Maiintindihan mo yung pinagmumula ng galit ni B2, kung ano yung pinanggagalingan, or kung saan nagsimula ang lahat. So, this conclude to the idea na hindi lahat ng nakikita natin is totoo. So, in order to understand the reality and achieve the truth, we must consider the deeper perspective or yung mas malalim na pinaghuhugutan or dahilan ng isang sitwasyon to conclude a proper interpretation and to see the world fully. So, dito, si Stanley D, sinamarize niya yung basic principles ng phenomenology as the knowledge, meaning, and language. So, yung knowledge is the classical phenomenology. It is found directly in conscious experience. We come to know us and understand the world as we engage it. So, the next one is the meaning. Meaning or the phenomenology of perception. The meaning of a thing exists in its potential in one's life, what it means to you or for us, how you relate to an object determines its meaning for you. And lastly, the language or the hermeneutic phenomenology. It is the vehicle of meaning. We experience the world through the language used to define and express the world. This principle remind us that through language, we give meaning towards something. So, dito na po nagtatapos ang discussion natin about the phenomenology. And for the continuation of the other approaches in interpretation, we will be having the next presenter.
Good day, everyone. Hi, hello. My name is Francine, and I will be doing my part on the language and gender reporting. So, this presentation explores how language just doesn't reflect gender roles. It actively shapes and reinforces them. Theresa Carmray was one of the earliest researchers to draw attention to how bias and unequal the structure of language can be, especially when it came to the experiences of women and other marginalized groups. Her work helps us see language as a powerful tool, one that often used to maintain existing hierarchies, but that also holds potential for challenging them. So, Kramer's key idea here is that language plays a central role in shaping how we understand gender. From an early age, we're taught that there are only two categories, male and female. These categories aren't just biological, they are social, and they're reinforced every time we use language to talk about people. For example, think about how often children's toys, clothes, and behaviors are described in gender terms like for boys or for girls. Although starting from I'm not entirely sure on the first time period, but before then, toys weren't actually gendered. Um, colors weren't gendered. Men sometimes wore heels, they wore pink, they do other things. And then for women, sometimes they're also associated with blue or such. Um, it only started to become gendered when it became commercialized. Like let's put it like that. Commercialization put gendered terms on toys, on clothing, and on color. So these simple phrases may seem harmless, but over time they create powerful mental association. This relates closely to the concept of linguistic relativity, the idea that the language we speak shapes the way we think and perceive the world. So if our language only gives us rigid gender categories, we're more likely to think of gender in rigid ways. Karmaris challenges the system by pointing out that language doesn't just reflect gendered ideas, it constructs them. From Rye's argument that English is a man made language is grounded in how language was historically created and controlled by men. As a result, the experiences and identities of men, especially white, heterosexual, middle class men, which were predominantly back then the major standings, the people who are majorly standing in society, have become default in language. For instance, many job titles use male forms as the standard, as such actors, host, waiter. Um, think of any other word that's predominantly just a neutral term, but then when we gendered it to like identify a woman, it changes. So when women do the same jobs, the titles are altered to show they're women, such as actress, hostess, and waitress, like that. These aren't neutral labels, they reinforce the idea that men are the norm and women are variation. Even honorifics like Mr., Mrs., and Miss show this imbalance. A man's title doesn't reveal his marital status, but a woman's title often does, giving people information about her personal life that she may not want to share. These kinds of linguistic norms create an uneven playing field where women are seen and not as equal. Oh, right, here we go. These kinds of linguistic norms create an even playing field where women are seen not just as different, but defined by their difference from men. Um, so like this. See, titles of Mr. and Mrs., waiters and actresses. So this male bias in language extends into societal systems and institutions. Kermer points out that schools and textbooks often frame history in terms of war, politics, and great male leaders. Topics like family life, domestic labor, or reproductive rights, topics that affect women deeply, are usually sidelined or ignored. See? Um, this is very accurate, as if you think about it, it's only been a couple of decades when women got their first suffrage, when women were first allowed to vote, where their rights were started to be seen. It was only just a couple of decades ago. As such, well, men had theirs for far longer. Centuries, millennia even. Okay. The same is true in the field of technology. For example, building cars or constructing skyscrapers is recognized as technological progress, but innovations that benefit women, like in the invention of tampons, are rarely acknowledged as significant even though they solve real problems. Why? Because they're only seen as benefiting women and therefore not considered serious or universal technology. This shows how language and social values work together to elevate male experiences and minimize the female ones. So it's not very equal, is it? It's despite us saying that language is for everybody, it typically goes for more males. So let's go move to the muted group theory. To explain why women often struggle to be heard, Kramer turned to the muted group theory, originally developed by anthropologists Edwin and Shirley Adener. Ardener. According to this theory, dominant groups in society, such as men, develop the language that reflect their worldview. Meanwhile, non-dominant groups like women don't have equal power to shape language. As a result, women's ideas and experiences often don't fit easily into dominant forms of communication. This forces women to translate their thoughts into male-centered terms or to speak more carefully and monitor their tone in public spaces. This translation process can be exhausting and limiting. When women speak in a way that differ from male norm, they're often ignored or misunderstood. And when masculine and feminine forms of speech clash, masculine ways of speaking tends to prevail. The dynamic makes women's voices literally and figuratively muted in public discourse. Okay. So these are the alternative forms of women's expression. In response to these limitations, women historically created alternative spaces and forms of communication. These include informal and nonverbal methods of expression, such as sewing circles, cooking, gardening, dancing, storytelling, shopping, and book clubs. These may seem like everyday activities, but they often serve as powerful ways for women to build relationships, express identity, and share knowledge. However, because they fall outside of the male dominated arenas, they're often dismissed as unimportant. Kramare argues that this dismissal actually gives women a kind of freedom. Since these forms of communication are overlooked by men, they're less regulated and more open. A striking example is the mothers of Plaza de Mayo in Argentina. As grieving mothers, they weren't seen as political threats, which allowed them to organize protests and gain international attention for their cause. Their, their example shows that marginalized voices can still create powerful images, even when the dominant language tries to silence them. A wild thing to think about how women back then weren't even seen as a threat. Beyond me. Okay. Language in the digital age. In the digital age, Karmara's insights are more relevant than ever. Today, online spaces are full of debates over language, what counts as offensive, who gets to define what, and how people are expected to communicate. For instance, there's ongoing tension over what qualifies as a joke versus harassment, or how to interpret terms like cancel culture, triggered, or microaggression. These aren't just disagreements about words, they battle over meaning and power. The internet has opened up spaces for more voices, but dominant groups still have more control over the platforms and policies that define acceptable speech. Karmraya reminds us that language is always political. Who gets to speak, whose words are believed, and whose stories are heard are all depend on who controls the rules of communication. A feminist dictionary. One of Kramar's most creative contributions was co-authoring a feminist dictionary with Paula Treichler and Anne Russo. This dictionary challenges male-centered definitions by offering alternative meanings rooted in women's lives and experiences. It shows that even something as simple as a word can have radically different meanings depending on who's using it. For example, the word hysterical is usually used to describe someone as overly emotional and irrational, especially women. But in the feminist dictionary, it is defined in historical terms as a role created for Victorian women who were forced to suppress their real feelings. Another example is the word home, which carries different meanings depending on context. It can be seen as a safe space, a prison, or the site of political revolution. This project highlights the ideas that words don't have fixed meanings, they carry the power of the people who use and define them. Right? See, it's wild how back then, when we think of this, like, yeah, they're accurate when they say that when we think of hysterical, we just used to think of, oh, this person is hysterical. How do you put this in newer lingo? It's a way to say like, oh, bro crashed out, like that. But for a feminist dictionary, it means that these were for Victorian women. How Victorian women were described as oftentimes they are women who were forced or sold to marriage for social status, and therefore are having their emotions suppressed, and therefore when they crack, they became hysterical. So it's a very interesting and very fascinating way to describe this. And then finally, Kremer works next to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which argues that the structure of a language affects how its speakers perceive and understand the world. But Kremer goes further. She suggests that language isn't just a mirror of reality, it actually creates that reality. If language shapes what we think, that we can think and say, then the people who control language effectively control how the world is understood. This is why feminist scholars like Cromary stress the needs to challenge and redefine language, to make safe space for new meanings, inclusive identities, and alternative worldviews. Language is a living thing, and we all have a role in shaping it. Thank you very much. That will be all. The next reporter.
So now, let's talk about what is constructivism is. Constructivism is a theory which we are having knowledge and understanding about by experiencing it. Just like we are doing in our daily lives since we are just born. We acquire knowledge by experiencing it, by knowing what will it cause. And now let's move on for the key concepts of what this constructivism is. So for the first one, learning as an active process. We mean by learning an active process? It means learning is not just from what we heard, it's also from what we are doing. Learning by actually doing it in our firm learning way. And for the second key concept of constructivism, it is social learning or of culture. So what do we mean by social learning of culture, of nature? This points out that we also learn by interacting with people, such our friends, our community, our family, and by communicating, we are adapting the skills, the actions, and sometimes the attitude. We are, in short, we are imitating them. And for the third key concept, it is by a reflection. What do we mean by reflection? We are reflecting ourselves. We are thinking what we have done in our day, or we are analyzing it and knowing our strengths and weaknesses and the reasons behind it. And for the last one, individual interpretations. So in every language or in every way of speaking, we have different kinds of interpretations, such as the meaning of what you have said, or sometimes it is how we produce it, or how we extract it in every people, like how we interpret each experiences on our daily lives. Especially, we have our own way of interpreting based on our personal backgrounds.
Good day, I am Kimberly T. Orsara, and today I'm going to discuss the speech act theory. What is speech act theory? Speech act theory, primarily developed by John L. Austin and further refined by John Searle, examines how we use the language not just to describe things but to do things. It focuses on the intention behind an utterance and how that intention is conveyed and understood. Meron tayong 4 aspects of speech act. Ito ay ang utterance act. Utterance act, the physical act of saying something. This is the most basic level, the actual productions of sounds or written words. Example, physical uttering the words, the cake is delicious. Ang utterance act ay ang nagsasabi ng isang bagay or ang pagsasabi ng isang bagay. Ito yung aktual na nagsasabi ng mga salita o nakasulat na salita. Ibig sabihin, itong proseso ng pagbigkas o pagsulat mismo ng isang salita o pangungusap nang walang pagsasaalang-alang sa kahulugan o intensyon. Halimbawa, ang pagbigkas ng magandang umaga. Sunod naman ay ang propositional act. This refers to the act of expressing a proposition, a statement that can be a true or false. It's about the content of what's being said. Example, in the cake is delicious, the proposition is the assertion that the cake possesses the quality of deliciousness. Ang propositional act naman daw ay tumutukoy sa pagpapahayag ng isang proposisyon, isang pahayag na maaaring totoo o mali. Pangunahing nakatuon ito sa nilalaman ng sinasabi. Hindi lang to ang pagbigkas ng mga salita, kundi ang kahulugan at intensyon na nasa likod ng pahayag. Halimbawa, kapag sinabi na, "The cake is delicious," ito ay nagsasabi na ang cake ay merong katangian ng pagiging masarap. Ang elocutionary act naman, the elocutionary act, this is the core of speech act theory. It's the speaker's intended meaning or purpose in uttering the words. This is what the speaker is trying to do with the words. Saying the cake is delicious could be an assertion stating a fact, a recommendation, suggesting someone to try it, or even an indirect request, implying the listener should offer some. The elocutionary force is the intended meaning behind the statement. Ang elocutionary act naman daw ay ang tunay na layunin na nagsasalita kapag nagsasalita siya. Hindi lang ang sinasabi, kundi kung ano ang gusto niyang mangyari dahil sa sinabi niya. Halimbawa, may kinakain ka na cake, tapos yung katabi mo bigla na lang nagsabi na, "Sarap naman ang cake." Pwedeng pinaparinggan ka niya na gusto niya rin ng cake na kinakain mo or nangihingi siya sa'yo. Isa pang halimbawa, yung friend mo naman nagsabi na nauuhaw siya. Pwedeng request yun na ikuha mo naman siya ng tubig or simpleng parinig yun na bigyan mo siya ng tubig. Sunod naman ay ang perlocutionary act. Ang perlocutionary act, this is the effect the utterance has on the listener. It's the actual outcome or response the speaker hopes to achieve. Example, if the speaker says the cake is delicious, hoping the listener will take a slice and the listener does so, then a successful perlocutionary act has occurred. Ang perlocutionary act daw ay ang epekto ng sinasabi mo sa nakikinig. Ito yung kinalabasan ng sinabi mo na nangyari, yung resulta o reaksyon ng nakinig. Hindi lang yung sinabi mo na mismo, kundi yung ano yung nangyari dahil doon. For example nga ay yung si Frenny na nagparinig na, "The cake is delicious," ganon. Ang gagawin mo na ngayon, aalokin mo siya ng cake or bibigyan mo siya ng cake kasi pinaringgan ka niya. And ikaw naman na mapagbigay, binigyan mo na kasi nagparinig siya. Ito yung example ng successful perlocutionary act kasi nakuha ng nagparinig na friendly mo yung gusto niyang iparating sa'yo, which is yung gusto niya ng cake na meron ka. Next naman ay ang assertive. Elocutionary acts into 5 types, which is assertive, directiveness, and commissive, expressive, and declarations. Dito muna tayo sa assertives. Assertives, statements that commit the speaker to the truth of a proposition. Examples include stating, affirming, concluding, and believing. Ito yung example na the earth is round. This commits the speaker to the truth of the proposition. Ang mga assertive naman daw ay mga pahayag kung saan ang nagsasalita ay naninindigan sa katotohanan ng sinasabi niya. Para bang sinasabi niya na naniniwala ako. Declarations. Dito muna tayo sa assertives. Assertives, statements that commit the speaker to the truth of a proposition. Examples include stating, affirming, concluding, and believing. Ito yung example na the earth is round. This commits the speaker to the truth of the proposition. Ang mga assertive naman daw ay mga pahayag kung saan ang nagsasalita ay naninindigan sa katotohanan ng sinasabi niya. Para bang sinasabi niya na naniniwala ako na totoo to. For example, sinabi ko na bilog ang mundo. Yun yung pinaninindigan ko dahil para sa akin, yun yung totoo. Next naman ay ang directiveness. Ito naman yung these attempts to get the listener to do something. Examples include commands, requests, questions, invitations. Example, please pass the salt. This is a direct aim at getting the listener to perform an action. Ang directives naman daw ay mga pangungusap na naglalayong hikayatin ng nakikinig na gumawa ng isang bagay. Maaari itong maging mga utos, kahilingan, tanong, o imbitasyon. Layunin nitong mag-udyok ng aksyon o tugon mula sa tumatanggap ng mensahe. Halimbawa, sa pag-uutos, nag-utos ka na isara mo ang pinto. Ito ay isang direktang utos na walang paligoy-ligoy. Meron naman tayong susunod na commissives. Commissives, committing the speaker to a nature course of action. Examples include promise, vows, pledge, guarantees. Example, I promise to pay you back tomorrow. This commits the speaker to a future action. Ang mga commissive naman ay mga pahayag na nagbubuklod sa nagsasalita sa isang aksyon sa hinaharap. Ibig sabihin, nangangako ang nagsasalita na gagawin niya ang isang bagay. Kasama sa mga halimbawa nito ang mga pangako, panata, at panunumpa. Isa naman sa halimbawa nito ay kapag nagsasabi tayo ng promise ko sa'yo, babalik ako bukas. Ito naman ay isang simpleng pangako na may kasamang tiyak na oras. Next ay ang expressives. Statements that communicate the speaker's psychological state. Examples include thanking, apologizing, congratulating, welcoming. Example, thank you for your help. This express gratitude. Ang mga expressive naman daw ay mga pahayag na nagpapahayag ng kalagayan ng damdamin o isipan ng nagsasalita. Hindi ito naglalayong mag-utos o mangako. Ito ay nagbabahagi lang ng emosyon o saloobin. Mga halimbawa nito ay ang pagpapasalamat, paghingi ng tawad, pagbati at pagtanggap.
Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Carnaval C. Doringo and I'll be explaining the coordinated management of meaning. So what is coordinated management of meaning, or CMM? CMM is a communication theory that explains how individuals construct social realities through communication and how they are simultaneously shaped by those realities. So coordinated management of meaning, it explains how people create, coordinate, and manage meaning in conversations. CMM is a practical theory that provides framework for understanding and improving communication in various contexts, with the goal of creating more meaningful and effective social interactions. And also, CMM focuses on the process of how people tell stories, how they can coordinate without shared meanings to enable cooperation, and how to improve communication patterns for better social outcomes. So, ang CMM ay ipinapaliwanag nito kung paano ba tayo lumilika o gumagawa ng kahulugan sa pamamagitan ng pakikipag-usap at kung paano nga rin ba naapektuhan ang ating social reality. Ayon kay Barnett Pierce at kay Vernon Cronin, ang communication daw ay hindi lang basta patungkol sa pakikipagpalitan ng impormasyon. Patungkol din to kung paano ba tayo nagbibigay ng meaning o kahulugan at tuwing nakikipag-usap tayo. So what are the key ideas of coordinated management of meaning? So the first key idea is communication is a process of social construction. So just what like I said kanina, na paano ba tayo nagre-create o bumubuo ng isang kahulugan sa pamamagitan ng pakikipag-usap. It's a process, no? So sa second key idea is we create meanings together, not alone. So, syempre, paano tayo makaka-create ng isang meaning o kahulugan kung hindi tayo nakikipag-usap, no? At ang pangatlo naman ay meanings are shaped by context. Hindi lang tayo basta nagbibigay ng kahulugan, no, pag nakikipag-usap tayo. Binabase rin natin to sa konteksto, no? Yung context kung ano nga ba yung pinag-uusapan bago tayo magbigay ng kahulugan. At ang pang-apat naman ay the same words can mean different things in different situation. So hindi porket na same words ay same din ang kahulugan, no? Or it can mean different, no? Depende sa sitwasyon. So there are multiple levels of meaning. 6 to be exact. So the first one is the content. Yung actual words na sinabi mo. Sunod, speech act. Kung ano ba yung layunin mo sa sinabi mong yon? Ito ba'y pabiro, pautos, patanong, and sunod naman, episode. Ano ba yung situation mo dun sa pag-uusap nyo? Like, ano ba yung actual na pangyayari, no? Sunod naman ay relationship. Like, how you see each other, no? Ano ba yung turingan ng ano ba turingan nyo ng kausap nyo? Sunod ay life script. Kung ano ba yung pagtingin mo sa sarili mo, no? And sunod, the cultural patterns, mga pamantayan or tradition. Like, ano ba yung nakasanayan? So, magbibigay ako ng example sa binigay kong 6 levels of meaning kanina. So, ito ang scenario. Merong 2 workers na nag-uusap during meeting. So, pangalanan natin yung dalawang co-workers. Ako at saka si Sir JR. So, sinabi ko kay Sir JR sa meeting na we need to step up our game or kailangan natin pagbutihan. And si Sir JR nainis sa akin. So, kung ipapasok natin siya sa 6 level of meaning, sa content level, maaaring nagbigay lang ako ng motivational comment na sinabi ko na kailangan lang natin pagbutihan, ganito ganyan. Kung ipapasok naman natin siya sa relationship level, maaring si Sir JR ay na-offend, no? Na feel niya na-criticize siya or na-disrespect siya dahil sa sinabi ko. Parang, siguro parang pinapatamaan niya, ganon. Pinapatamaan ko si Sir JR na kailangan natin talaga pagbutihan kasi ganito ganyan. And kung sa episode level naman, so it's a professional meeting naman. So, baka mamaya nasa stressful meeting na kami na yung tension sobrang high na talaga, kaya ako nasabi na we need to step up our game. Ganyan. So, sa cultural level naman, kung ipapasok natin sa cultural level, si Sir JR, meron siyang tradition na mas prefer niya talaga yung direct feedback, no? So, parang na-upset siya sa sinabi ko kasi nga parang pinaparinggan ko siya, hindi ko na lang siya diretsahin na ganto ganyan na kailangan ko galingan, ba't kailangan na paringgan pa na we need to step up our game. CMM or Coordinated Management of Meaning helps explain why the same message can be interpreted differently depending on context and relationship. So that is Coordinated Management of Meaning. Thank you.
Now let us proceed to explore nonverbal communication and language theories emphasizing cultural diversity SDG 10, reduce inequalities. Language theories that emphasize cultural diversity recognize the interplay between language, culture, and identity. These theories treat language not merely as a means of communication but as a powerful that reflects, shapes, and preserve cultural identities. So, dito is not just we are communicating, but dito is yung makikita natin pagkikilanlan ng kultura natin, yung kinalakayan natin bilang mga Pilipino. Halimbawa ako dito, lumaki ako sa Cavite. Dito mo makikita ko kung paano ko makipag-communicate. And pag napunta ka sa ibang lugar, parang nag-iiba yung tingin nila sa'yo kasi hindi ka naman dun lumaki, di ba? So, parang ako Cavite, tapos napunta ako sa Davao, parang mag-iiba yung pag-communicate ko sa kanila kasi hindi ako sa kanila lumaki, dito ako sa Cavite lumaki, hindi sa Davao. So, mag-iiba. Parang magkakaroon ng miscommunication, ganun. Parang nagkakaroon ng
barrier, communication barrier, something like that. Yeah. So, eto, magbibigay ako ng here's some key concept ng communication. So, first is socio-linguistic. This focuses on how language varies and changes in social groups, underlying the impact of cultural context on language use. So, dito, yung gumagamit tayo ng mga iba-ibang slang, kagaya dito sa yung nakalakayan natin is dito sa Cavite. Hindi lang dito sa Cavite, sa ibang culture na gumagamit tayo ng mga ibang slang kagaya ng pet malu, malupet, lodi, idol. Parang ngayong yun yung mga culture ngayon na Gen Z, millennial na ngayon 2025 o last 2024 parang nauso na agad yung pagrarumble ng mga words like yung ganyan nga, yung pet malu, lodi, nagiba, tapos yung ngayon above, mga ibig sabihin babae, maraming pag yung ibang matatanda, pag nakikipag-communicate ka, hindi nila maintindihan kasi iba yung henerasyon nila dati compared sa ngayon na henerasyon natin na mga Gen Z, millennial, parang hindi nila tayo maintindihan kasi iba na yung panahon ngayon compared sa dati. Now, let us proceed to number 2, cultural linguistic. The area examine how language and cultural conceptualization are intertwined, showing that language is a carrier of cultural meaning. Dito is yung mga kasanayan nating kultura. Di ba pag naririnig natin yung Noche Buena, tumatatak sa utak natin pag narinig natin Noche Buena, di ba Christmas, Pasko, kasi yun yung kultura na meron sa atin. Pag narinig na natin yung ganun. And another example is yung bahay kubo. Paano mo siya pag narinig mo ba yung bahay kubo, yung nagre-represent doon. Hindi lang siya bahay, hindi lang siya basta bahay na kubo. So din siya nagre-represent sa Pilipinas natin na simpleng pamumuhay ng mga Pilipino dito sa ating bansa. Yun yung mga kultura natin, kung ano yung dati nating kultura na kinalakihan natin. Now, let us proceed to number 3. Worldly Englishes. This refers to the variation of English that have emerged around the globe, reflecting the diverse cultural and linguistic context in which English is used. So, dito yung English is lumalaganap na sa buong mundo. Kung dito sa Pilipinas, meron na tayong language natin is established na, Tagalog and English, mix na siya. Diba? Pag nagko-communicate tayo, may hindi lang basta pure Tagalog, may English na. Like for example, may mga nakatawa talagang part yung tinagalog mo, Englishin mo pa. Yun, yung like for example, where are you going? Saan ka pupunta? Parang in English mo na nga, tinagalog mo pa. Nakakatawa sa ibang mga tao, 'di ba? Tapos meron namang yung mix nga, 'di ba? Where are you going? Tapos sasagot yung isa ng Tagalog. So, kunyari ako, nakipag-communicate sa akin ng English, sinagot niya ako ng Tagalog. Naintindihan niya ako, pero sumagot siya ng Tagalog kasi nahirapan siya sa English. So, ganun po siya. Number 4 na tayo, code switching. This term refers to the practice of alternating between languages or dialect in conversation, reflecting the cultural identities of speakers. So, code switching is dito yung bigla ka nagsiswitch sa ibang language. 'Di ba? Karamihan ngayon marami na sa mga Pilipino ngayon alam na yung mga salitang Korean, kasi yun sikat dito ngayon, Japanese, kung ano-ano mga lingwahe na papanood natin sa social media. Yung epekto talaga ng social media is napakalaki sa atin mga kunyari English, diba? Napakalaki, bigla kang mag-switch agad sa English. imbes na mas minamahal natin sarili nating wika, mas napapamahal tayo sa sa ibang wika kasi yun yung parang na impluwensya nga tayo sa social media. Yun yung like sa Korean, 'di ba, napapamahal na sa BTS. Oh, parang gusto kong gayahin to, parang gusto ko mag-aral ng lingwahe na to, gusto ko magpunta sa Korea, gusto ko makita si ganito, ganun na mag-isip yung mga tao ngayon, parang iba na. Ganun ba? So, now let us proceed to number 5. Last part ng ating language theories. So, number 5 is ethno-linguistic. This approach studies how language relates to culture and ethnic identity, exploring how language and thought process intersect with cultural norms. So, dito is yung pagkakakilanlan sa atin kung bisa kasuotan natin, kultura, pananalita, parang pag narinig ko yung ganitong lingwahe, alam ko na itong alam ko ng Pilipino to, alam ko ng Koreano to, alam ko ng Korean to, alam ko ng taga Bicol to, alam ko ng taga Mindanao to, parang 'di ba kadalasan sa mga klase, may mga klase tayo nagbibisaya, parang ma-impluwensyahan din tayo, nakapagsalita din tayo ng mga salitang mga Bisayas, ganun, mga Bicolano, nanawa tayo sa kanila kasi lagi natin sila na nakakasalamuha, ganyan. Yun yung nagiging epekto sa atin.
Have you ever felt like opportunities aren't always equally shared? Like some people seem to start life in the pedestal while others are left struggling just to get by? So that's where Sustainable Development Goal 10 comes in. It reduces the inequalities within and among the countries. So all about the reducing inequalities both within countries and between them. Imagine a world where no matter where you were born, your gender, or how much your family earns, you still have a fair chance to pursue your dreams. That's the dream of SDG 10, or Sustainable Development Goal 10, that wants to make it a reality. So at its heart, this goal recognizes the inequality doesn't just harm individuals, it holds the entire communities back. So when people are left behind, it affects the economy, the well-being of society, and even the bonds that tie us together as human beings. Sustainable Development Goal 10 is about breaking down these barriers so everyone everywhere can thrive. So next, the big focus here is the inequality opportunities. So inequal opportunities is to ensure the equal opportunity and reduce the proportion of people living in poverty in all its dimensions, addressing disparities that exist based on geography, gender, or socioeconomic status. So whether because of their form, their gender, or their socioeconomic status, they can step out of that cycle. It's about making sure that where you start in life doesn't limit where you can go. So by addressing these disparities, Sustainable Development Goal 10 give us the chance to build a world that's fairer, kinder, and more united. And that's all.